The sun was setting over the quiet suburban neighborhood when Zeeshan unlocked the rusty gate of his newly bought house. For most people, owning a home in such a community was a dream come true. But for Zeeshan, it was not a dream. It was the result of years of sacrifices, double shifts at work, sleepless nights, and saving every penny he could. The house itself was small but decent. The walls had a fresh coat of paint, and the windows shone in the fading light. But there was one glaring problem: a broken fence that ran along the front yard. Several planks were missing, others were tilted or half-rotted, and weeds had started to grow around them. Anyone who passed by could tell that this fence was in desperate need of repair. The very next morning, Zeeshan received a letter in his mailbox. It was stamped with the seal of the Homeowners Association, HOA. With trembling hands, he opened it. "Dear resident, your property fence does not meet HOA standards. Please repair or replace it within 30 days, or you will face a fine of $1,000. Zeeshan's heart sank. $1,000 was an impossible amount for him. He had already spent everything he had on buying this house. The thought of another expense nearly broke him. As he stood outside, reading the letter again and again, a group of neighbors passed by. He could hear their whispers. "That new guy won't last long here. The HOA is strict. They'll eat him alive. He doesn't look like he can afford repairs anyway." Their words stung like daggers, but Zeeshan kept his head down. Inside, his thoughts were a storm. Why did this have to happen now? Why couldn't I get just a little peace after working so hard? That evening, the HOA president, Mr. Coleman, a tall man with a sharp suit and an even sharper tongue, knocked on Zeeshan's door. "Mr. Zeeshan," he said coldly, "this neighborhood has rules. That fence of yours is an eyesore. You have 30 days. No excuses." Zeeshan tried to explain that he didn't have the money for repairs, but Coleman cut him off. "Then maybe this isn't the right community for you." He turned and walked away without another word. When the door closed, Zeeshan sat silently in his living room. His hand was shaking, his chest heavy. Giving up felt easier than fighting. But then his eyes fell on an old photograph of his parents back home, smiling at him with pride. He remembered their words: "No matter how hard life gets, never bow down. Stand tall, even when the world pushes you down." Something inside him ignited. He clenched the letter in his fist and whispered to himself, "I will fix this fence. Not with money I don't have, but with my own 2 hands. I won't let them break me." From that night forward, Zeeshan's struggle truly began. The next morning, Zeeshan woke up earlier than usual. The letter from the HOA still lay on the table, a constant reminder of the challenge ahead. Most people would have felt crushed by the pressure, but Zeeshan had made a decision. He would repair the fence no matter what. After finishing his long shift at work, he walked into a small hardware shop in town. He couldn't afford new wood or expensive materials, so he searched for scraps, discounted planks, secondhand nails, and tools that looked like they had already been used 100 times. The shopkeeper raised an eyebrow when Zeeshan explained what he planned to do. "You're going to fix a whole fence with this? That's not easy, son." Zeeshan simply smiled. Maybe not easy, but possible. That evening, as the neighborhood lights began to flicker on, Zeeshan stood in front of the broken fence. He laid down the old planks and gripped a worn hammer. The first strike echoed into the night, loud, clumsy, but filled with determination. Hour after hour, he worked alone. The night grew colder, and sweat dripped down his forehead. His hands became sore, small cuts forming on his fingers, but he refused to stop. He whispered to himself with each nail he hammered, one plank at a time, one day at a time. From across the street, a few neighbors watched in silence. "Look at him," one muttered. "Working in the dark like that, he'll never finish." Another chuckled. "The HOA will crush him. You should just sell the house." But Zeeshan didn't listen. Every word of doubt fueled his fire. The harder they doubted him, the stronger his resolve became. Around midnight, headlights flashed across the street. A black car pulled up. Mr. Coleman, the HOA president. He stepped out, polished shoes clicking against the pavement. Folding his arms, he stared at Zeeshan, struggling with the fence. "You think you can fix this mess with scrap wood?" Coleman said with a smirk. "This neighborhood has standards, Mr. Zeeshan. Don't waste your time. You'll only embarrass yourself. Zeeshan wiped the sweat from his forehead, his breathing heavy. He didn't raise his voice, but his words carried power. Even if it takes me all night, I'll finish this with my own hands. Maybe I don't have money, but I have willpower, and that is something you can't find me for. Coleman's smirk faded slightly. Without replying, he returned to his car and drove away. As the taillights disappeared, Zeeshan tightened his grip on the hammer. His arms trembled from exhaustion, but his spirit felt stronger than ever. He knew the road ahead would be long, but he also knew something else. He was no longer just fixing a fence. He was proving a point. And with every nail he drove into the wood, he was driving hope into his own heart. For several nights in a row, Zeeshan worked tirelessly on his fence. He would come home after his long shifts, change in his old work clothes, and pick up his hammer as if it were his weapon of survival. The clanking of nails, the scraping of wood, and the echo of determination filled the quiet nights of the neighborhood. Yet, no matter how hard he tried, progress was slow. His tools were worn out, and the wood he had collected was not enough to rebuild the entire fence. Sometimes he would stand back and look at what little he had managed to fix, and doubt would creep into his mind. Am I really going to finish this in time, or will they break me with that fine? One night, as he struggled to lift a heavy plank, his arms nearly gave out. He leaned against the half-repaired fence, sweat dripping from his face, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. Just then, he heard footsteps behind him. It was his neighbor, Mrs. Miller, an elderly woman who had been quietly observing him from across the street for days. She held a bundle of wooden boards in her hands. "Zeeshan," she said softly, "I had some leftover wood in my garage. I thought maybe you could use it." Zeeshan blinked in surprise. "Mrs. Miller, I can't take this. You might need it." She shook her head and smiled. "No, son, I don't need it, but you do. And I admire your determination. Not many people would work this hard after such long days." Her words warmed Zeeshan's heart. He accepted the wood, thanking her sincerely. That night, for the first time, he didn't feel alone. The next evening, another neighbor approached. Mr. Johnson, a middle-aged man with paint cans in his hands. "I heard you're fixing the fence," he said with a grin. "Thought this paint might help when you're done. A fence isn't complete without a little color." Soon, word began to spread throughout the neighborhood. One by one, people started coming forward. A young boy brought a box of nails his father wasn't using. A teenage girl offered brush. Another man offered to help lift the heavier planks Zeeshan couldn't manage on his own. At first, Zeeshan felt overwhelmed. He had expected ridicule, maybe even hostility, but not kindness. And yet here it was, growing stronger with each day. The very community that once whispered doubts was now gathering around him, supporting him. As the days passed, the fence began to take shape, not just because of Zeeshan's hard work, but because of the unity it inspired. What had started as one man's fight against impossible odds was slowly transforming into a shared mission. And every night, as more neighbors joined, Zeeshan realized something powerful. The HOA might have rules, but the real strength of a neighborhood lies in its people, not in its regulations. Days turned into weeks, and what once looked like an impossible task slowly began to transform before everyone's eyes. Zeeshan's broken, half-rotted fence was no longer just a pile of old wood. It was becoming a symbol of resilience and hope. Every evening after work, he would return to the yard, and without fail, neighbors would appear. Some came to help lift the heavier planks, some brought tools, and others simply stood by to encourage him with kind words. Even children joined in, running around with brushes, splashing a little paint here and there while laughing. At first, the fence looked patchy, built from scraps of different shapes and colors. But as days passed, it started to take a solid, uniform shape. The gaps disappeared, the lines straightened, and when the final coat of paint was applied, the once broken fence stood tall and proud, shining under the sunlight like a crown for Zeeshan's home. But something even more surprising happened. Inspired by Zeeshan's effort, other families began to take a closer look at their own homes. Mrs. Miller planted flowers along her walkway, turning her dull yard into a bright, colorful garden. Mr. Johnson repainted his porch, making it look brand new. A group of kids built a small birdhouse and hung it near the community park. What started as one man's lonely fight turned into a movement. For years, the neighborhood had been silent, controlled by fear of HOA fines and strict rules. People rarely spoke to each other, each family locked in its own little world. But now, because of Zeeshan's determination, they were smiling, talking, helping each other. The streets felt alive again. One Saturday morning, as Zeeshan hammered the last nail into the fence, dozens of neighbors stood around, clapping and cheering. The sound of joy filled the air, echoing louder than any warning letter the HOA had ever sent. For the first time, Zeeshan stepped back and truly looked at what he had accomplished. It wasn't just wooden paint. It was sweat, sacrifice, kindness, and unity woven together. He felt a lump in his throat as he whispered, "This isn't my fence anymore. It belongs to all of us." But not everyone was smiling. From across the street, the HOA president, Mr. Coleman, stood watching. His sharp eyes scanned the freshly built fence and the happy crowd surrounding it. For the first time, he realized he was losing control. The power of rules and fines was nothing compared to the power of unity that Zeeshan had awakened. Though Coleman said nothing, his clenched jaw and stiff walk back to his house told everyone that a storm was coming. Still, in that moment, Zeeshan didn't feel fear. He felt strength, and deep down, he knew something had already changed forever. The neighborhood was no longer silent. The day of the HOA meeting finally arrived. The community hall was filled with residents, all waiting to hear the board's decision about Zeeshan's fence. The air was thick with tension. Some feared that despite all the hard work, the HOA might still find a way to punish him. At the front sat Mr. Coleman, the HOA president, wearing his usual dark suit and stern expression. His papers were neatly stacked, and on top of them was the fine notice addressed to Zeeshan. Coleman cleared his throat and spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here to discuss the violation regarding Mr. Zeeshan's property. As you all know, his fence was not in compliance with HOA standards. Our rules are designed to protect the beauty of this neighborhood, and no exceptions can be made." He lifted the fine notice and prepared to read it aloud. But before he could continue, a voice rose from the back of the hall. It was Mrs. Miller, the elderly neighbor who had first helped Zeeshan. "Mr. President, with all due respect, have you even looked at the fence now? It's not a violation, it's a masterpiece. And more than that, it brought this community together in a way your rules never did." The room erupted with agreement. One by one, residents stood up. "He worked harder than anyone I've ever seen. He inspired us to fix our own homes. That fence is the pride of this neighborhood." Coleman's face tightened as the voices grew louder. For the first time, he realized he was outnumbered. He tried to regain control. "Rules are rules," he began, but before he could finish, Mr. Johnson stood up. "Rules mean nothing if they destroy the spirit of a community. Zeeshan didn't break this neighborhood. He built it back." The hall filled with applause. Zeeshan, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, felt a wave of emotion rise in his chest. For days, he had fought alone. For weeks, he had doubted himself. And now, here were dozens of voices standing for him, united because of his struggle. Coleman stared at the paper in his hand. His fingers tightened, then slowly relaxed. With a sigh, he tore the fine notice in half. The sound of ripping paper was drowned out by the cheers of the residents. "Very well," Coleman muttered. "The fine is canceled. The fence stays." But Zeeshan didn't smile out of victory alone. He stood up, his voice steady but filled with gratitude. "I didn't build this fence alone. Every plank, every nail, every brush of paint, it all came from you. This isn't my fence. It's our fence. And it proves one thing. When we stand together, no rule can break us." The crowd erupted again, clapping and cheering. In that moment, Zeeshan wasn't just a homeowner fighting the HOA. He was the heart of a community reborn. That night, as he walked past the shining fence, Zeeshan placed his hand on the wood and whispered to himself, "Hard work, courage, and unity. These are the true foundations of a home." If you enjoyed this story, Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful HOA stories like this one.